Welcome back to the Rebel's Edge. We've got a lot to talk about. Is there gold in Fort Knox, or is it just Goldfinger's undies? I have a poll out there, and Goldfinger's undies are leading versus the amount of gold that's actually in there. Then, of course, we have Walmart's disappointing guidance, as well as President Trump talking about not tariffs, but cutting defense spending, which has several stocks in the sector to the downside. That and a lot more on today's Rebel's Edge. Bang.
Here we go. Off and running, but unfortunately, we're running to the downside today, John. I mean, they're taking it to the market pretty good, huh?
Yeah, well, when the world's largest retailer, Pete, says guidance going forward is that Americans don't have that much left to spend, that ain't good. President Trump talking about defense spending cuts, that had Palantir just crashing to the downside after a furious run to the upside, Pete. Yeah, there's a lot going on today and a lot of heavy turnover. I'm sure you'll cover some of that with the VIX report that we'll be getting to in just a sec. Again, folks, that's not Mark Lopresti. That's a far better looking Pete Nigerian than Mark the Shark. And we're going to dive right into Macro Minute, Pete. Yep. And Macro Minute, we've already touched on it. It is Walmart. The fact that Walmart is warning about earnings going forward, that the, I guess, profit margin will not be as big as people had hoped, Pete. Even as more and more people from the middle and upper middle class start shopping there, there's still a pretty significant trade off from the higher priced items, and that's going to hurt them going forward, they say.
Well, and I agree with you, John, and I think that is the macro side of things. Is really we're focused on earnings, right? And I've been moving more and more to earnings, rather than some of the other stuff going on. But in this case, in Walmart's case, we're talking about earnings and some of the reaction that they're giving us in terms of what's going to go on with the tariffs. And I think that combination has people a little bit concerned. I think that's why you probably got some of the guidance out of Walmart as well. So let's not forget, this is a stock that has been absolutely bottom left to upper right, and it has been ripping for the past year or more. So it's pulling back. Yeah, it had some good numbers, sure, but that guidance, it really was not what people wanted to hear, and that's why we're seeing such a big sell-off, I think, in the overall market, because that now was the focus for the big macro picture.
Yeah. Well, what about fantastic futures, Pete? I won't belabor it, folks. We could do a whole hour just on this subject, but get this, gold. And as I say, Pete, I do have a poll that's running right now, and the poll is asking, are there really 147 million ounces of gold in Fort Knox? Or is it 100? Or is it 75? Or is it just Goldfinger's undies? Goldfinger's undies is leading the poll with over 1,000 votes, I think, so far, Pete. So we'll have to see how that shakes out. But here's one of the things that people haven't spoken about. And I had to run this through Grok 3, which is, of course, X. That's Elon Musk's AI, Pete. I had to run it through there as well as Chat GPT 4.5. And what I asked was, how much are we valuing the gold that is in Fort Knox? And what I found out was the U.S. Treasury, because that's not the Fed, the U.S. Treasury runs that, Pete, and they have it priced at what it went in at in 1974, which was $44.22 an ounce. Now, gold's a little higher than that right now. It's more like $29.50 or something like that. And so obviously it's not $6 billion worth of gold, which it was back then. It's, pretty close to 500 billion just in Fort Knox. And it's also in the U.S. Treasury stash in New York and elsewhere, Pete. So my question is, I guess, why are we pricing it at the price it went in rather than the fair market price that you could sell it for, you're not going to dump 147 million ounces of gold. I get it, but it's still worth a hell of a lot more than 44 bucks.
I think those are all really good questions, quite honestly. And I don't know that we're going to get really good answers on that, John. I'll just say real quickly that one of the things that I'm looking at, well, I'm looking at two things like I always do. My top two things. One, the 10-year. Now, the 10-year has been as high recently in the last, call it, month, 4.63 to about 4.42 on the low end. Where are we today? We're at a 4.5. We are right smack dab in the middle. So gives you a little bit of an idea of where the 10-year is in terms of that usually is something that's reflected. And when it comes down a little bit, that you start to see the NASDAQ start to move to the upside. NASDAQ's not down nearly as much as we're seeing out of the Dow today, John. It's down about 0.75%. So yeah, it's down 130 points. It's not that big of a deal, and I don't think that's something to be panicking about. I'm also looking at the volatility index, John. Volatility index is always interesting. We've been talking about that. We've seen 50 Cent come in and do a lot more in terms of some of the options that we are seeing getting bought in there in the volatility index itself. But we haven't made a huge move yet, and maybe we will soon. But as of right now, we've gone from the upper 14s to the middle 16s. And by the way, we just dropped back underneath 16 as we speak. So there's not a huge panic right now over the VIX itself.
Well, Pete, the 30-year mortgage rates are at 8-week lows right now. We finally broke down to 6.85. 6.85. That's the average of the 30-year mortgage right now. And obviously, with 5 straight weeks of declines in the mortgage rate, that's a good thing, Pete. Yeah. Obviously, President Trump wants to see a lot lower interest rates sooner. I don't know if he'll get them, but I think a lot might have to do with whether or not 50 Cent is right about a big pop in volatility, because that could be one of the catalysts that could do that.
Yep.
All right, folks, we're going to do a little small cap spotlight. This is a company that we're involved with. I own some shares in this one, OS Therapeutics. It's a publicly traded company. It's OSTX, like X-ray. And the company made a big announcement, Pete. They hit a big milestone today. Specifically, they were notified that a patent will be issued covering the manufacturing methods for their osteosarcoma drug. Now, it's entering phase 2 trials right now at the FDA. And as you guys are seeing right here, this OS Therapies, these guys really are cutting edge for what they're doing, Pete. And this is a big deal. So hats off to the folks at OS Therapeutics. I think this is a very positive step forward for them, Pete. So obviously, as shareholders, we're happy about it. We're sharing it with you guys because the patent will be issued for this. Now, I will caution you, that's not the same as the FDA saying, yep, phase 2 trial, thumbs up, phase 3 trial, thumbs up, sell it. It's not there yet, but we like highlighting these for you because on the way to those sorts of milestones, you can get better deals than when that milestone is hit and the stock pops. No guarantees, but I do think that this is a pretty big deal for OS Therapeutics and their shareholders, Pete.
It's a big one. It's going to be pretty interesting to keep an eye on. These names can make some moves that a lot of other names in the world don't make those kind of moves. So it's a very interesting place to be for sure. And as you know, I cut my teeth on the trading floors in a lot of these various types of names in that category. So I've seen the moves that they can make, and they can be, if you're on the right side of it, they can be absolutely unbelievable.
Yep. Well, let's dive into stocks now, Pete. After that small cap stock spotlight, let's talk about BABA, because I know some people on TV, Pete, were really, really bad mouthing this one when it was in the 80s. Well, today it popped all the way into the 130s, 140s, Pete. And by the way, we did indeed have unusual activity. Now, what's unusual activity? That is when we see people buying in big numbers. There are 2 examples of it with the stock below 100 and below 90 on those 2 examples we have on the screen. And today boom, Baba making a big pop, and those calls going to $44, Pete. So that's a pretty interesting move. When you get moves like that, you got to appreciate them, and you've got to be willing to take some off the table. We can't pull the trigger for you, folks, but when our subscribers see something like that, we let them know that you'd be wise to not be a pig, right, Pete?
Yep. We call it discipline, and you've got to have discipline in this market, or else you're just going to get carried out at some point, because it's one of those kinds of things, John. Matter of fact, we did hit 52-week highs today. We did hit $144 a share. So new 52-week highs, yep, not so bad. Up 81% in the last year, not so bad. Up 60% year to date, again, not so bad, right? I mean, this is a name that absolutely is ripping to the upside. They actually brought up the word DeepSeek on their as they were delivering some of their numbers, John. They beat on the revenue. They did a great job. Year over year, up 8%. When you look at this and the strategic priorities of e-commerce that they've got, what Baba brings to the table, it's really incredible. I mean, you know, they have done an outstanding job once again. It's not a name that we've talked about as much as we one time did, and yet we probably should, John, because this is a name that is just continuing to be very, very consistently good. And like you said, a lot of people were talking negatively about this one. Boy, oh boy, I wonder how they're feeling about that, because it's pulled off that 144 level, but nonetheless, it's still up about 7% on the day. Not so bad. And they did everything that they needed to do in terms of the aggressiveness of how they pushed AI and everything else, John. Baba is still one of the kings of China.
Indeed. And we're going to keep our eye on Jack Ma and all that kind of stuff, Pete, because this is one of his kingdom and one of the really pearls as far as Chinese companies. Let's talk about Walmart, one of the big companies in the United States, biggest retailer in the world. Strong quarterly earnings, Pete. But that was not enough, because even though top line, bottom line both beat, their guidance was not what the street was looking for. And for that reason, it put a pall over the entire market, because they're the biggest retailer in the world. They're bigger than Amazon. Amazon's the biggest online seller. These guys are the biggest retailer on earth. And even some good earnings from a place like Shake Shack, Pete, that's pretty specific to one thing. Whereas Walmart is a broad swath of everything from groceries to durable goods, if you will. And when people, or at least Walmart executives, think they're going to be cutting back, that ain't good.
It's not good, but I'll tell you what, John, what they delivered was damn good. I mean, they beat on their earnings by 10%. Their revenue was up 5.3% year over year. Let's not forget this too, by the way. So we're kind of nervous about what's going on right now with Walmart, right? And I'm taking a real quick look. It's down just a little bit under 7%. John, this is a stock over the last year that's been up 75%. So giving back a little something today, I don't know that we should be as concerned. I think the words that they were talking about has people kind of a little bit nervous for sure, because they are talking about, well, where do they stand going forward? And that is the problem. And it's something that always ends up being the problem, is when you start saying something negative on the guidance, people are tending to just turn and burn and give it a little bit of a push. I wonder about this, John. Next quarter, I wonder what it really looks like, because I don't know how far down they're actually going to have to get hit. And I don't think it has to go all that far. So is this a bump in the road? I kind of think so. Is it still the trade down stock that is the stock of stocks? I'd say it still is. And I think that people will still be going, and they might even start to capture more people, John, than losing people, as other people that haven't actually done the trade down to Walmart maybe start thinking about it. So I don't know. I keep this one high on my list as I'm watching it getting hit today. Like I said, 7% versus the 75% over the last year. It doesn't make me all that nervous yet.
All right. Well, how about this one, Pete? I bet you were nervous about this. Unity Software. So Unity Software was basically down hard. Shares fell over 10% before the opening bell, Pete. And then they issued first quarter revenue guidance below Wall Street expectations. That put the whip to it. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, Pete, People just dismissed that and said, yeah, but on the other hand, next quarter's revenue guidance is impressive. It's a lot more than we thought. So they reversed that big short and turned it from a 10% negative to a 27% positive in the flash of an eye, Pete.
I don't know that I've ever seen anything quite like it, John. Like you're saying, I mean, I look at it in the pre-market and this thing is just getting slammed, right? I mean, and a lot of it had to do with, well, you know, they might have missed here or they might have missed there. So the stock was trading about 19 bucks. It was down however much percent. But this turn and burn to the upside where it's up and above that $26 level, that pushed it not that terribly far from the 52-week highs of 33. So it's really, really an interesting reaction. I mean, like that says right there, negative to be positive. This negative side that actually ends up being positive by 24% is an absolute amazing move. I don't know that you and I have seen anything quite like this. I know this name pretty well only because we've got Gino not too far away from me over here, John. This was one of his stocks for a really long time. He liked this name. Unfortunately, he was probably a little bit too early because that was when it first came out with the IPO and everything else. But it has adjusted pretty nicely. And the move today is something that I'd say is pretty daggone shocking. I have not seen that kind of a turnaround in a stock in a really long time. As a matter of fact, going back in my mind, I can't remember the last time I saw a stock that was down that hard, that turned and actually went through the positive and is up on the day by almost 25%.
Yeah, it's something just to marvel at, I guess, Pete. And if you were in puts and you had an opportunity in the pre-market and you didn't take it, shame on you. I had no position in this one, but I was just befuddled by why people would buy it up so fast from where it was, Pete. It just didn't seem to make sense to me. Yeah. The news was not that positive.
No.
Let's talk about something that news is positive, Pete. And this is data centers in China. You and I have covered this a lot in the last week because GDS, this company, GDS Holdings, has been doing fabulous things in the last week alone. Well, and then the stock would tank the day after. Well, this is not the story of a tank today. This is the story of, wow, unusual option activity. That really did surprise everybody. Because on the 18th, just 2 days ago, stock's 40 bucks. They bought the Feb 43 calls. Well, they paid $1.15. Pete, they went to $9. So how's that for a run out of this particular company? Just incredible.
I don't think I've ever seen anything like it, like you said, John. I mean, I just took a quick peek just to see year to date what it's looking like, and it's up 98%. I mean, this is a stock that has an unbelievable push coming from the backside and pushing it up, and it just continues to just be absolutely unbelievable. And up 7% today, just continues on to this great run that it's been on. It's incredible. Chinese data centers, I mean, the revenue growth is there, so that's strong, 18% rather year over year. You've got to like that. And some of the rates that they were talking about, up 76% in terms of utilization. There's just a lot of really interesting growth that they are showing. And by the way, and this one I got to give full credit to, there is a group out there at Citigroup that has an analyst who came out before this, John, not today, after we see all this different movement and everything else. We have an analyst at Citi who actually got up there last week and said, you know what? Price target has moved from 25 to 51. He did that beforehand. That's when it matters. That's when people care. I don't know why anybody listens to these analysts that after all the news is out there, they suddenly give you their take. It's like, well, that really isn't all that helpful now, is it? This guy did it. So all the credit in the world to Citi for that run, and still has that buy on it and everything else, looking for 51 bucks. It's not that far away from 51 bucks, John.
Yeah, it's 48 bucks right now, Pete. Bang. All right. We got another video for you, folks. And this is from a very popular commentator, and as Pete said, a goaltender that says, what could the NBA learn from the NHL? And I like his take, and I thought you would too, Pete. So let's give it a listen.
They could learn a lot.
Hockey's a different sport from the NBA. you can't compare the cultures because of the way the game is played. You can step on an NBA floor and go through the emotions. You can't do that in hockey. You can't. Like the culture of our sport, you have to play it with passion. You have to be willing to fight. You have to be willing to leave it on the ice. That's what fans are investing in. So for us, when we charge $1,500 for a ticket to come to Fort Knox, fans know what they're getting. Cale Makar, the best defenseman in the world, wasn't in the lineup for this game. This was the most viewed game that we've had in years. And you see it, it's not just based on the skill and talent. It's based on the pride, honor, playing for the guy next to you. I got a question for the NBA players. What the hell are you playing for? What are you playing for? It's not about the money. You make all the money. What, you're injured? Well, there's a difference between being hurt and injured. Are you hurt or are you injured? There's a difference. In hockey, we play hurt. We play injured. That is the culture of the sport. It's always been that way. So you want to talk about the business, the CBA. Fans get all of that. But what do fans resonate with? They resonate with what's real. You got to fight sometimes for your country. You got to compete. You got to go out there and leave it on the ice because those people are paying the price of admission. So fans know whether our stars are on the ice or not, they're getting their money's worth. The NBA has that issue that they got to work on. You got to create a better culture for your players. It starts with the leaders. This issue, there was no issue when Jordan was around. There was no issue when Kobe was around. There's no issue when Sidney Crosby's around. There's no issue when Wayne Gretzky was around because those are true leaders. They lead by example. Sidney Crosby, Hockey Canada, those players, both Canada and U.S., it was the players that did that for the Four Nations. It's not the league. The league set it up, but the players went out there and decided and said, you know what, boys? We're all in. When is the NBA going to do that? Because you know, I haven't sat down and watched the NBA consistently since Kobe.
I was over in there. Never.
Love the players. I think LeBron's great. I think KD's great. Steph Curry. Love watching them. But you got to be on the court. You got to be there. And when you're there, you got to go all in. The fans got to feel that they're getting their money's worth. And right now, there's a big difference between what the NHL's doing with those events and what the NBA's doing. Four Nations works because the players are all in.
Yeah, he is right, Pete. I mean,
he's right.
If you're all in, and if you recognize that somebody did pay $1,000 or $1,500 for that ticket, you can't just sit on the bench or show up for the All-Star game in your street clothes like LeBron did. Is he one of the best players in the world? Yes, he is, of course. Is he the GOAT? No way. He's not even close to the GOAT. But you've got to do what those players did up in Canada and Montreal. Doesn't mean you have to have a fight, but you have to have passion, just like he said. And Pete, the game is tonight. It's USA versus Canada, but it's in Boston. And it's one of the hottest tickets in sports. Tickets are already $4,000 and climbing. That's more expensive than the Super Bowl, Pete. So you can bet this is the best thing that's happened to hockey in a long time.
What do you think will happen in Boston when they play the Canadian national anthem? That will be epic. Absolutely epic. It will be great. Oh, and he was right on every front, you know, and it all speaks to load management. He actually did mention LeBron. Let me tell you, I can't look at the guy because of that. It's pathetic. You know, you can't do that. You just can't do it. Jordan showed you the way, and you should probably follow the real GOAT, right? And Kobe, the next GOAT. You know, different era GOAT, maybe call it. So unbelievable. But anyway, John, let's just jump to a couple of things real quick. We'll talk about the NFL. And here's what I just thought was amazing. I saw this story come out yesterday, and I thought you'd appreciate it. So the salary cap for 2025 went up $22 million. This is bailing a lot of teams out right now, for sure, because a lot of them were either over the cap or pushing on the cap, and now all of a sudden they've got a little bit more cushion. Now, we all knew that it was going to go up, but we didn't think it'd go up by that much, and it's unbelievable how well they've done, John. As a matter of fact, the cap is up $53 million in the last 2 years is how much the cap has moved up. It's now basically, let's just call it $280 million. There's the low and the high end, but it's $280 million when it's all said and done. And what a perfect timing for all of this, because now all of a sudden we've got free agency. What are you going to do with some of your quarterbacks? What are you going to do with some of the other players on the team? Maybe this helps out and packages up some of these trades that people are willing to do and all the rest of it, because of the fact that we know what the numbers are now, and now they've got to play within those numbers. So I just find it just remarkable, John. I thought it would go up. I thought it might go up substantially, but I didn't see the 22 million coming, especially after last year. So 53 million in 2 years, pretty nice numbers, don't you think?
Yeah. Well, you know, we've talked about it time and time again, Pete. NFL and NCAA football are two of the top, out of the top 100 viewed events of the last year. They are 97 of them, I think. It's just incredible. I mean, people want football, and that's what they watch.
All right, next one up, we're going to do a real quickie as well, John. NFL draft. It's coming up. We got, it's 1 week from today. They're going to be running 40s, doing bench presses, doing all the physicals and everything else. I talked to a bunch of different guys in the NFL yesterday, just asking them some questions about different players and all the rest of it. So here's what I got for you, just for fun, John.
Okay.
The number one pick in the draft right now is Tennessee. Now, do they go quarterback? Because they certainly need a quarterback. They screwed up on their last go around with drafting, and they went after a quarterback. So do they do that? Or, in my opinion, they don't do that. They go for the best player in the draft, probably. And that's my take. And I'm going to say Abdul Carter, Penn State, defensive end / outside linebacker, rush, edge player. I think he is going to be the first pick to go. And he just comes behind a whole group of guys from Penn State that bring it from the outside. And we always compare everybody. When you talk about that, you compare it to, one of the very greatest of all time. And I'm not sure any of them are quite as good, but I will say this kid Carter, John, has all the tools to be about as unbelievable of an edge rusher as there is. So I think he goes first pick. Then I think the next two, when you look at Cleveland and the Giants, now you just got to decide, do you go to Shedeur? Do you go to Cam Ward? Do you go a different route? Do you trade down? Because you need a quarterback, but both of those teams need a lot more than a quarterback. And they've already, had a problem by going quarterback before. So what do you think? Do you think that, your guy Shedeur is good enough to be one of those two players that goes that high?
Yeah, I do. I really do, Pete. The guy's completion percentage went up 23 versus 24 during those 2 years. He went up from a 69% completion average to 74%. His yards passing in the 2023 season, he was like 3,200 yards. In 2024, he was 4,100 yards. I mean, these numbers just show you how much better he is getting. I don't know that you've got a similar move like that from Cam Ward, Pete. As good as he is, as good as many of these other quarterbacks that'll be coming out next year are. I don't know that they've shown this kind of improvement, because people knew Shedeur was good last year, in 2023. And then in 2024, he got better. So that and his lineage, the fact that he's Deion Sanders' son, and he seems to have a lot of that, not just star quality, but next level talent. I think that's why you take him. So I would argue he is the best. If I had the number one pick, that's the guy I'd take.
So I'll tell you this, John. I've got a guy that know his name, but I've got a guy who I think is the sleeper of the draft as a quarterback. And as I look around, I see him maybe not even being in the first round. And I just sit there going, wow, if I'm a GM, I might have to kind of move around a little bit. But last year it was Bo Nix, right? And all Bo Nix did was lead Denver into the playoffs. Not so bad. Had a pretty damn good season, actually, himself. Jackson Dart from Ole Miss gets lost in the shovel. Everybody kind of looks around going, this guy's okay, but it's all about Shedeur. It's all about this Cam Ward. It's all about this guy and that guy. And for whatever reason, Jackson Dart doesn't get a lot of props, John. I'm looking at it right here. He's got 17 touchdown throws of 20 yards or more. He led the nation in deep passing. He had 29 touchdowns and 6 interceptions. A lot of what I just read to you is a lot like Bo Nix, except for he's throwing the ball further downfield than Bo was. Bo's criticism was quick, boom to the side, boom to the side. This kid, Jackson Dart, I think he will be the sleeper of the draft, and whoever gets him, I think, has got the winner. I mean, and if you need a quarterback, whoever you are, and you're somewhere in the latter part of even the first round, and people will say, Pete, you're crazy. You don't take him that early. Let me tell you something. That guy, I think, is the best quarterback in the entire draft. I really do. I think he's got all the things that you want. His coach loved him. Everybody who's watched the kid throw the ball, he's just amazing to watch how good he really is, John. And 6 interceptions, not so bad for a guy who's throwing downfield a lot. He's putting the ball in the air, and he's not putting it in the other team's hands.
Well, that's always one of the true measures of a quarterback, Pete. I'd throw it up there with, decision-making at the line of scrimmage, as well as, okay, ball snapped, how many seconds before you release it? Right. The best of the best do it in about 2.7 or less. The best of the best. Shedeur is right there at that, but he's not the number one. There are guys with faster triggers. They might have more interceptions, but they're faster triggers. NFL is all about fast triggers. You've got to you've got to make your judgment. And like, I loved when I heard Brady say, Pete, that he said, we would go over everything so much before the game that when I got up there, he said, I'd talk to Belichick and he'd say, okay, run this play. And then he says, what's the one thing you're worried about? And he goes, free safety blitz. And he says, right. So what do you do if you see the free safety looking like he's coming up? Tom says, I check down to this, and so forth and so on. Those decisions are what separates guys like the GOAT, Tom Brady, from everybody else. And unfortunately for Mahomes, he didn't have time in the Super Bowl to do anything. I think 40% of the passes, Pete, he had people in his face or breathing down his neck. 40%. That line looked terrible. If you needed to pin the loss on somebody, it would be KC's O-line. Obviously, Mahomes could have played better, but when you're running for your life, it doesn't often happen that way.
It's pretty tough.
Well, thanks for joining us, folks. It's been a great day. It doesn't look like the kind of day where the market turns around and does what Unity Software did, but we have seen a lot of those in the last few days of the market being down and then turning it around at the end or cutting the losses into the close. In any case, Pete and I will be back Monday next week with a fresh Rebels Edge, 1 p.m. Eastern Time. We'll see you then.